Welcome to another edition of A Voice to the Gentile Church. I'm Jim Wingerter. Next to me is Pastor Roger Diaz. Next to him is Dolores Lowe. So Dolores, we heard through the grapevine that the Iranians have been selected by the UN to head up a Committee on Human Rights.
Yep, the UN Human Rights Commission, UNHRC.
Mouth open, marveling.
Complete, unbelievable irony, right?
Yes.
To have...
Inconceivable.
For those of us who remember that show, right?
Yes.
Inconceivable. So the UN has decided in its infinite wisdom that Iran is just the right country to head up the Human Rights Commission in 2023. This is the same UN that trained Hamas operatives in Iran.
The
Iranians. To carry out the attacks of 10/7. These are the same people who beat women to death in the streets because they didn't wear a hijab.
Right, in their streets, their women.
Their women. I don't know if you all remember, about maybe 4 months ago, there were big demonstrations in the streets of Iran.
Right.
Because that had happened. A woman had been stopped by the police that they have, the Iranian morality police, and they basically beat her to death. And you would have thought that would have been it. But just last month, the same thing happened again, right? But these are the people who should be running the Human Rights Commission for the UN. An organization that we give $12 billion to, and we fund a fifth of their... the more I look at the U.S. government, the more shocked I am at the wanton disregard for life, because there is, right? And I'm not just talking about abortion.
No.
What's going on at the U.S. border right now, our southern border, is basically enabling trafficking of children. And this isn't me. This is Senator Ted Cruz saying it, who was down there last week. And he documented everything. And then we support organizations like the UN. Wherever the UN goes, misery follows, right? You have pedophilia. You have women being raped. You have money being stolen, fraud and corruption. But still, we insist on pumping money into that organization.
Well, the root of the issue with the UN is spiritual. Mm-hmm. And there's never been a psalm that's been more appropriated to a given time than Psalm 83.
Right.
And Psalm 83 is really crafted by God for where we are right now, because the very countries that are forming this de facto caliphate against Israel are mentioned in Psalm 83. And the Elam, or Elamites, Elam is mentioned very prominently. So Elam is Iran. Elam is heading up this whole thing. But according to the Psalm, there's a global conspiracy. The nations are conspiring. So I think the UN is actually that entity that's putting this together. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? Why would the United Nations, which stemmed from the League of Nations, an organization that had humanity's well-being at heart, why would they conspire against one nation? Well, it's biblical, it's spiritual. It's spiritual. The entity that's driving this whole movement is Satan himself. Mm-hmm. He is the main principality that's moving this whole thrust. So the United Nations are doing the bidding of spiritual wickedness, and the Arab nations are being enabled and empowered by the UN. So it's Psalm 83.
Yep, absolutely. So moving on to the next.
By the way, before we go further, I believe we should all be at this time praying Psalm 83. We should memorize Psalm 83 and pray it on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
Because there's not another psalm that's more time appropriate than that one right there.
Mm-hmm. So the big news right now is the Israeli war, right, which is threatening to become a global war. So we had the initial attack between Hamas attacking Israel. We had Hezbollah attacking Israel from the north. We had a couple of rockets being shot into Israel from the south, and then we had the Yemenis shooting rockets, some of which were intercepted by the U.S. Navy, and the second attack was intercepted by the Saudis. So we have all these proxy organizations for Iran, in essence,
Right.
fighting Israel. But then we have Turkey raise its little head, right? And they're all into, they have taken the side of Hamas, they're aligning with Hamas, which causes all sorts of problems, because if we all recall, Turkey is part of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right?
The great moderate Sunni Islamic State.
Yeah. So
if they provoke something against Israel and Israel responds, all of the NATO alliance has to come together against Israel.
that theoretically, that is exactly what should happen. There complications arise because the way the NATO treaty has been written, no one can be kicked out of NATO. Once you're in, you're in. The only way you can leave NATO is voluntarily, right? So you could become the worst country in the world and they can't kick you out.
That's the Europeans for you.
Yep.
So it was developed during World War II, wasn't it?
At the end of World War II.
At the end of World War II. And so everyone who was interested in being a part of it was in the North Atlantic.
Yeah. So I read an
Because Turkey is not in the North Atlantic. Let's just
Exactly,
clarify
yes.
that right now.
Well, Turkey became part of NATO because of the dealings with the First World War, with the Ottoman Empire, how
Right.
there was a fusion between certain southeastern European states and the Ottoman Empire. So that's how they got in. But they're not part of Europe, of
Right.
course, but they got factored in.
Right. And I think at one point NATO was just wanting anybody to join NATO that they could, right? And then they hit like critical mass and then they started being more selective.
Well, but there's still a give and take. The U.S. decides which pawn they want to
Right.
use,
Exactly.
whether it's the UN or NATO, for whatever circumstances
Right.
it applies the best.
But it's going to come back and bite us, right? I read an interesting commentary today where the discussion centered as to why is this going on right now, right? Why this is Israel being attacked right now, and why is it being allowed? And the commentary centered around the fact that Israel is the only real nuclear power in the Middle East, and the fact that the Russians and the Chinese want to take that pawn off the table, right? Take Israel off the table, make Israel give up its nuclear arms so that they have free reign in the Middle East. Of course, that kind of goes along with our administration, which has been facilitating Iran getting nuclear weapons for three administrations right now. Obama one.
Have they
Obama
admitted
two,
that that's their goal? Because initially they just said they wanted the Iranians to have nuclear power plants.
everyone knows that what we have,
I agree,
we have
but
been,
they've never actually come out and
yeah,
said.
the
I mean,
le-
but the
level
truth
of
is,
uranium we're allowing to be enriched
Right.
is ridiculous.
so Israel has never admitted that they're a nuclear force.
Right, they have never admitted it.
They've never denied it,
Right.
but they've never.
Right. But do you really doubt that Israel has nuclear?
They have to.
Right.
They're sitting
Exactly.
ducks if they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look at the nuclear programs around the world. There have been an awful lot of scientists of Jewish descent that have developed those programs, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, Israel has
A lot of
nuclear
people that I know said when this whole thing happened with Gaza, why don't they just nuke Gaza? And I said, well,
I was right there.
okay, but the airflow always goes from west to east, so the fallout would have come right over Israel.
Yeah, but a tactical one, just right. I mean, I hate that. I hated that that's the way I felt, right?
Right.
Because, and I've had this discussion with some Christian friends of mine, because the first thing that Christians go to is, where's your compassion?
Right.
Turn the other cheek, all that, right? But look at what was done.
Did David, who had a heart like God, ever turn the other cheek in battle?
Right.
You're a dead man if
Exactly.
you do.
And look at what was done. we're not just saying they attack civilians, which is against the Geneva Convention to start with, okay?
Right.
They attack civilians.
Right.
But they beheaded babies. They raped girls and women.
The term inhumane just doesn't cover it.
And the ultimate, they took a baby, stuck him in an oven, and turned on the oven. These people, I'm sorry, they're even worse than the Nazis.
Yeah. Oh, much.
Yeah. And for what? Because let's talk about it. Do they really want a Palestinian state? Let's look at the history.
Oh.
In 1937, the Peel Commission offered them a Palestinian state. They turned it down. 1947, the UN partition
right before
offered
Israel.
them a Palestinian state. The Jews agreed. The Arabs turned it down.
Right.
1993, Oslo Accords. They turned it down. 2000, Camp David Agreement. They turned it down. 2008, Annapolis Conference. They turned it down. They have no interest in it. It is not about the land. It is about killing Jews.
All the money that the U.S. has given them, they could have built a resort along the Mediterranean coast and drawn tourists. But no, they hate so deeply that they had to build military infrastructure. Yeah.
And today, the Hamas official, I can't remember his name. I'll have to pull it up. He said... Joshi Silverman, which is the deputy spokesperson, I'm sorry, Joshi is the Israeli director, but the Hamas official, Hamzi, I can't remember his last name, who lives in Qatar, by the way. He's the head of Hamas, which is supposed to be the legally elected government of Gaza, but he lives in a luxury hotel in Qatar. And today he said that they are victims and anything that they do is justified and they will repeat the October 7 massacre. So all those people who are out at Columbia University, Harvard, Yale, Berkeley, claiming ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire.
Right.
This is what it is. All a ceasefire will do
give them an opportunity to regroup.
Exactly. Exactly. And it has gotten disgusting. Yesterday I logged on to the Daily Mail and there is a refugee camp called Jabalia and Israel bombed it yesterday. 50 people died, right? And of course the headline, the huge headline, Israel bombs refugee camp in Gaza. It isn't until you get to the bottom of the article that they say, oh yeah, it was a refugee camp, but underneath there were all the tunnels. And oh yeah, 50 people died, but they were all the terrorists that were in the tunnels. So they are misleading the populace. And already, let's face it, the Gen Z generation that's in our schools today know nothing,
right? Think
nothing, and have become the dupes of the liberal professors that are teaching them.
Right.
So they're walking around claiming from the river to the sea, not even realizing what that means, and claiming, oh, the occupation. Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005.
Right.
They completely pulled out. What occupation? So anyway.
Well, I think they should occupy now. I think they should go in and take the land back.
I absolutely agree. You know, the Jordanians said that they absolutely refuse to take Palestinian refugees. And when the foreign minister was asked why, he said they would destabilize our society.
Right. That's a nice way of saying they're scumbags.
Yeah.
And so Egypt's that border's been shut. No one even walks up to it to say we're not opening it.
Well, they finally opened it today.
They opened it today.
People with foreign passports to come out. But the Egyptians have said they will not.
And I'm sure that was contingent that they had to take that passport and keep going.
Yeah, exactly. That is their red line. They're saying the same thing. They will not take a single Palestinian refugee. And it is the same story. Because there is no interest in bettering their lives. There is no interest. You know, I have 5 children.
You do?
My dream for my children was that they study, that they have a good life, that they get a good job, that they get married, that they raise a family.
That they respect people.
That they respect people.
That they care for the people they work with.
Right.
Yeah.
That is not the interest of the mothers
No.
in Gaza.
No.
Their interest is, oh, my son needs to become a martyr. Oh, my
Right.
son should kill. You know, one of the things with all of the horrible, horrible things that they did on October 7th, one of the worst things that I heard, not just saw, heard, was one of the Hamas terrorists who had just killed a bunch of people, calling his parents on his cell phone, rejoicing, Mom, Dad, I killed 10 Jews. That was his thing. And he was so, you could hear it in his voice. He was so happy about it. And his parents were so happy to hear it. I don't understand that.
They
thought.
said they wish they could be there with him.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. I honestly do
Well,
not understand.
you're talking
that
about a
process.
culture that was purposely groomed
Right.
for the purpose of being impediments to Israel and being murderers of Jews.
Yeah.
Their presence in the land of Israel, the so-called Palestinians, they're there to impede Israel from any progress. In the West Bank as well. The greatest fear is that things will erupt in the West Bank, and we'll see the same sort of thing in the north that we're seeing in the south. And there's much more potential in the West Bank because you have Ramallah, Jenin, and
they were demonstrating
Nablus.
yesterday in Jenin.
So it's a grave situation, and Israel has every right to react as forcefully as it possibly could, regardless of what liberal Christianity says or the media or academia. Israel has every right to protect herself, and true Christians, true Bible believers should understand this and not be confused about this. There's a lot of confusion in Christianity about this.
There
I'm
is.
not surprised.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and I mean, Egypt went as far as to say that they were prepared to sacrifice millions of Palestinian lives to protect their land.
Yeah, it's a terrible, terrible situation. And if the United Nations was anything close to what they should be, they would be properly intervening right now. But they're not. They're going along with their conspiracy to isolate Israel and nullify
look at Diaz,
Israel.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a total anti-Semite. He showed that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
The big
That's
bag of
amazing.
lies that has been perpetuated even back to Jimmy Carter and the Camp David Accord was the lie that if we gave these people what they wanted and we left them alone, that wounds would heal, and after 2 or 3 decades we'd all sit down peaceably together and come to an amicable agreement. And it's a lie. It's a lie from hell.
Yeah, that's the bleeding heart liberal.
Yeah.
It's the Western delusion because let's face it, they have never, ever not said exactly what they wanted, right? Which is the death to all the Jews.
Right.
They have never.
So no one in the media, in academia, in the liberal Christian world wants to deal with that fact that there's a purpose, an orientation that these people carry, which is total annihilation of Israel. Israel wants to defend herself and be at peace, but cannot be. And so, what do you do? What do you do with a people who really wants peace, but is receiving no help in regards to really fostering real peace, and their enemy is determined and committed to their destruction? What do you do?
Yep.
So Israel has to do what's necessary on behalf of their own defense and not worry too much about what's being said among the nations.
Well, and to continue on the whole, so Jihad Watch is reporting that in less than 48 hours they recovered 80 dead bodies and 20 headless bodies, all Christians in Nigeria, killed by Muslims.
Yeah, that's not going to make headlines.
Yeah.
You know, that's been going on for 25, 30 years, and it's been blacked out. It's been didacted and just ignored. The continent of Africa is being decimated by Islam, and no one cares.
Yeah, but even the Iranians, again, they are very clear about what they want. They don't hide what they want. It's the West with its delusion that doesn't want to believe it, right? My enemy, you tell me you want to kill me, and I'm like, oh, he doesn't really mean that, right? The Iranians came out and said, oh, we're going to go after the Jews first, and then we're coming after the Christians.
Yeah, they've been declaring that for years, and they've made it clear that quest for nuclear power is to be in a position to destroy Israel.
Right.
So we have a new speaker in the House.
Yes. You read my mind. I was heading there.
I had to change your
trajectory.
I'm sure my friends on Facebook are like, she's lost her mind, because I will not stop talking about it. So we have a new speaker in the House, Mike Johnson.
Which most of us had not heard anything of.
About him.
Right.
He's out of Louisiana. Very quiet, very mild-mannered man. However, with a rod of steel in his back. So for those who don't remember the whole speakership fiasco, right? So when Kevin McCarthy was elected to speaker,
right,
one of the concessions that was made for him to win the speakership is that anybody could bring forth a resolution to get rid of the speaker, right? Before, it had to be it had to be a coalition, right? It had to be a group. What got Kevin McCarthy to agree to, in order that he could be elected, was that anyone in the House could bring that forth, right? Of course, Kevin McCarthy never thought that was going to be used against him. But sure enough, it got used against him.
Right.
And the reason why Getz brought it against him...
Because he lied.
Yeah, he lied about investigating the president, impeaching the president.
Yeah.
He lied about those 85,000 IRS agents we were arming. Who knows why people who are taking your taxes should be armed. He lied about the January 6th commission. He still has not he still had not released video of that, right? So all those things had coalesced to make Getz, who's very conservative, come against McCarthy. Now, we also have to remember that McCarthy had been pushing to investigate Getz. Okay, so there was a back and forth. You could have said, okay, this is all witch hunting back and forth.
Yeah, there's no love lost.
Right. However, when the vote came, the night of the vote, there were 8 Republicans that were sitting on the fence. McCarthy had a chance to save himself, but there is a Republican congressman, and right now, I'm sorry, I cannot remember his name, but he is a solid Christian. And the night before the vote, McCarthy called him up to say, I need your vote. I need you to vote for me. And he said to McCarthy, I am praying about it. You know, as soon as I get an indication from God, I'll do my vote. McCarthy made fun of him. And that was it. That sealed it, right?
He's always been an arrogant ass.
Yeah. And that sealed it. He was out of there. So the vote comes up. You know, we now have to elect a new Speaker of the House.
Right.
The first choice was Scalise.
Right.
Scalise is a deep stater, right? So you knew there was going to be trouble because there's a very strong, the Freedom Caucus is a very strong conservative caucus within. So he was off the table.
Yeah.
The next person was Jordan, very strong conservative. I don't know how he wasn't the candidate because he got 200 votes, but he wasn't the candidate, right?
Okay.
So he's off the table. After 3 attempts, he's off the table. The next choice was Tom Emmers, a Republican who was financed by George Soros, who somehow got 107 votes for nomination, but still the nomination went forth, right? So at that point, me being me, I was losing it, right? I was like, okay, you guys need to be written off. You got to get off the table. But Donald Trump stepped up and said, Emmers is a deep stater. You do not want this guy. And enough people listened to him that he was off the table. So out of nowhere, Mike Johnson gets nominated. Nobody would have even thought about Mike Johnson being the nominee. Very mild, very solid Christian, but everybody likes him. He's a nice guy.
Okay.
He was on the board at Liberty University. He was he was one of the attorneys for the Alliance Defending Freedom, which defends conservative causes.
Right.
So very solid Christian. He gets elected, and the left is losing their mind.
Yeah.
You know, like AOC immediately started calling him an extremist. Jen Psaki, who
Well,
was...
he is compared to her.
Right.
Wait, she's the extremist.
And it didn't help that right after he got elected, he was in an interview on Fox News, and they said to him, "So what is your worldview?" And he pulled out his Bible and he said, "The Bible is my worldview. Read it."
Okay.
So that totally caused the liberals
Lose their
to
minds.
lose their minds.
Yeah.
And you said you didn't have any good news. So.
So it's interesting. It's going to be an interesting ride.
Yeah.
He is not backing. You know, he has had solid. He's, you know, anti-abortion, pro marriage between one man and one woman. And every time they ask him about it, he does not backpedal. And I think part of it is he didn't expect to be speaker. He didn't want to be speaker. But he found himself as speaker.
So the next big test, which is going to be a big test for him, is when they hit the debt ceiling again.
Yeah. Now, I have a friend of mine who is chief of staff for one of the congressmen up there, and I talked to him yesterday, and I said, are we going to have, you know,
Yeah.
a
circus again.
Down? He says that after the whole speaker fiasco, there's really no stomach up there to shut down the government.
Okay.
So he does not think they're going to shut down the government. I don't know. That's one person's opinion, right?
Meanwhile, spending goes unchecked.
Oh my
So
gosh.
there has to be a way.
So the interesting
Right.
thing that has already happened is the Biden administration, you know how they've been pumping billions and billions of dollars into Ukraine, right?
Yes.
Interestingly enough, yesterday there was a report about the level of corruption in Ukraine, right? There was also today a report about they no longer think Ukraine can even win the war. But being the Biden administration, they're still pushing it. So they tied aid to Israel with aid to Ukraine. The bill was written so that Israel would only get aid if Ukraine got aid. The first thing that Mike Johnson did was separate that. So it was just aid to Israel. Oh, and by the way, how are we going to fund $12 billion to Israel? Remember that money you pulled aside for those 85,000 IRS agents? We're going to take that money. And instead of funding 85,000 IRS agents, we're going to fund Israel. So to me, I think it's great. There are people who feel that because they feel that it's political and that Israel needs the money right away, so we shouldn't be doing this. But we are $33 trillion in debt.
Yeah.
We don't even have the money.
At some point, it has to belly up, and I would have thought it would have been a long time ago.
So do I.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have thought so too.
All right, we have a question.
Yep.
Spent a half an hour on
Sorry about that.
events.
Okay, so here's our question. What role does biblical archaeology play in establishing or supporting our faith in God? How does Christian academia factor into that prospect?
This is probably a question we should have dealt with a long time ago, but this came up recently, so now we have the opportunity to deal with this. So, all right, so archaeology, which stems from the word archaic, the study of ancient things or the study of things archaic.
Right.
It's a relatively new science, and I think you can call it a science. 1600s, 1700s is when it really began. And initially it wasn't biblical. It wasn't to prove the Bible or validate biblical narratives. It was to reinforce the Renaissance. In Europe, the Renaissance stemmed a thrust towards gaining knowledge, understanding more. Mm-hmm. And that's where initially archaeology came from. And it was very Hellenistic. It was very centered on humanism. And ironically enough, a lot of their digs and their archaeological campaigns were in Greece. So they were fascinated with Greece and Rome. And that was the case, like I said, from the 1600s into the mid-1800s, when archaeology took a turn and it became more focused towards biblical biblical research. And of course, Christians, believers, began to dig into what now is referred to as biblical archaeology.
Right.
Mid-1800s. And initially, its objective was to prove the Bible, to support the narratives of the Bible. And you can imagine how much archaeological evidence you can find in the land of Israel to support the Bible. Some of the places that they went to looking for obvious archaeological evidence was Mount Sinai, the site that was allocated to be Mount Sinai in Egypt, the Egyptian peninsula, right? So this Lake Helena, Queen Helena, the mother of Constantine, decided that this is where Mount Sinai was. How did she come to that conclusion in the 4th century? Well, she inquired of some Bedouins. And the Bedouins said, sure, yeah, that's Jebel Musa. And that's the ticket, that's Jebel Musa. And she said, okay, we'll build a cathedral there. And so that was one of the places they rushed to look for evidence. They found no evidence.
In that location. Right.
Of course, in the last 40 years, they've discovered the actual location of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, where it's supposed to be.
Where the Bible says it is.
The region of Midian. So yeah, and biblical archaeology has always been pressed to support the biblical narratives, but that changed. Right about 100 years following the establishment of biblical archaeology in the mid-1900s, biblical archaeology was handed over to academia. And academia began to not look for proof to support the Bible or the biblical narratives, but to look for evidence that the Bible cannot be trusted. And that's the avenue that they went.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The scholars and academia, that's the avenue that they went. But initially, the first 50, 60 years of biblical archaeology was what I call the golden age of archaeology, when they found tremendous evidences of that will support the Bible, and they're very, very rich, and so we can talk about a few of those. One of the greatest was in the beginning of the 1900s. Actually, it was in the 1930s. They discovered the ancient city of Nineveh, which was the capital of the Assyrian Empire.
Right.
Yep.
And they found a stele. A stele, you know what a stele is? It's a wall carving. An incredibly, extensive stele. I think it was like 40 feet across, depicting the battle of Sennacherib against Jerusalem.
Okay.
And they found it. Archaeologists digging in the area found this incredible stele, and it was well preserved. It was almost perfect, telling the story from Sennacherib's son's perspective of what happened in Jerusalem. You know the story of Isaiah chapter 35 to 39, when Sennacherib laid siege of Jerusalem, right?
Yeah.
The story is incredible.
It is.
And so this was found in the 1930s, and there was a great deal of rejoicing. We found something that validates the story of Sennacherib in Isaiah and in the Kings and so on. Well, it wasn't very long after that the scholars, academia, decided that they had to disprove the story that's projected in the Bible to validate their idea of what has occurred, what the true story behind the stele is. And the story behind the stele that they found in Nineveh, ancient Nineveh, simply depicts that Jerusalem wasn't taken by Sennacherib, and that Sennacherib lost his army. He came back to Nineveh, and his sons assassinated him.
That's biblical.
And they built a stele depicting what happened. Mm-hmm. So the purpose of the stele was to sort of to state why Sennacherib had to die. But also, when he took Lachish, was also depicted on the stele, because he marched into the land of Israel, spent 3 years to take the city of Lachish, succeeded, and decided that he'll just move further south and take Jerusalem. And it didn't quite work out. So academia came along and said, well, we have to find the truth behind the story of Jerusalem, because there is no way that Sennacherib, this great Assyrian king, with an army of 80,000 men and chariots and war machines could have been defeated in one night. Now, the story in the Bible is King Hezekiah turned to Isaiah and cried out to God, that cried out to God, and God responded. It was the night before Passover. Well, it was Passover. The sun had gone down. And they woke up the next morning after God intervened, and the whole army was laid waste in the Kidron Valley and surrounding Jerusalem. 80,000 men died in one night. Sennacherib woke up, got out of his tent. It's believed that his tent was placed on the Mount of Evil Council over on that side.
Seems likely.
And he walked out of his tent and he looked upon the battlefield. His whole army was destroyed. And he hightailed it back to Nineveh, right? So the academia and the archaeologists and so on, they decided that, well, here is what really happened. And this is an amazing story. It didn't happen the way the Bible stated it, right? There's more to the story according to them. What really happened? This is what they first came up with in the 1980s. The first rebuttal to the Bible and this incredible archaeological find, this stele. Their first rebuttal was, the truth is, there was a phantom Ethiopian army of 1 million men that stealthily came up from the Dead Sea area and crossed over and came into Jerusalem and destroyed Sennacherib's army and disappeared in one night. They were a phantom Ethiopian army, almost a mystical army. And they said that. They believed it. So that's bizarre.
Yes,
that academia scholars can come up with something like that. So you're telling me that there was a monumental battle where 1 million men descended into Jerusalem and killed 85,000 men of war, and no one heard anything? They were shocked when they got up to see that all of the Assyrians were dead. And disappeared. They really came up with that idea. And then sometime in the last 20 years now, they came up with a secondary possibility to defy the Bible. They said that it was a plague of field mice. That suddenly on that night, on Pesach, the night that Hezekiah cried out to God, and Jeremiah said, and Isaiah said, God's going to respond. On the very same night, a plague of mice, and they don't attribute it to God. Just randomly, coincidentally, there was a plague.
In the desert.
And they died instantly.
In the desert.
Right. So 85,000 men of war, died because of this plague. No one over that 16-foot wall died. And King Sennacherib, he was fine. So you see, I went through the whole story of the Assyrian stele to illustrate just how bizarre these academics are. Mm-hmm. They're not believers. Their purpose is to discourage faith. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let's talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Mm-hmm. All right, so 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls was discovered. They acquired, after 10 years, just a trickle of more and more of the incredible artifacts that was found. By the mid-1960s, they were able to put together an exhibit, right? Mm-hmm. Exhibiting the incredible find of the Dead Sea Scrolls that found at Qumran. One of the scrolls that they found and they exhibited in right around 1965 was the scroll of Isaiah.
Right.
And what's amazing about it is that it is perfect in its interpretation, translation to the book of Isaiah that we have today. And this dates back to 200 BC, book of Isaiah, the scroll.
Right.
Yes.
And so this is an amazing find. This came into existence right when the academians and the theologians and the scholars were beginning to take the position that God is dead. In fact, it was in 1966 that the New York Times issued that headline that God is dead. And what was the message behind that headline? That not that God doesn't exist, but God as portrayed by conventional Christianity at that time doesn't exist. Because look at what happened in World War II, World War I, Nazi Germany. Yep. God as we know him does not exist. So they had to redefine God. The God of the Bible is dead. And that was their position. So here comes, and they were also arguing that you can't trust the Bible. Mm-hmm. You can't trust this was their biggest thrust. You can't trust the Bible. It's not trustworthy. You cannot, because it was translated back and forth. And so how could you base your faith on a book that's not accurate? God is dead. So that was around the beginning of the 1960s. The theologians and so on were coming up. They were coming up with this idea. And then in 1965, the Israelis at Qumran unveiled this incredible find, the book of Isaiah, perfectly translated and in complete text, complete form. And what did that say? It said to the people who was doubting that the Bible is valid and you can trust the Bible, that you're wrong.
Right.
Here is a copy of the book of Isaiah that dates back 200 years before Christ, and it's perfect according to what we have today.
Right.
So, that archaeological find, the Dead Sea Scrolls, was incredibly profound in defying these people. It seems as if every time academia, agents of disbelief, would issue some statement or create some thrust to deny God, some great archaeological find would appear. Mm-hmm. And that's been consistent. I mean, in the last 150 years of biblical archaeology, that's been the case. Every time they push an agenda to defy God, to defy Israel, a lot of it has to do with Israel, then suddenly they're receiving evidences that just nullifies their efforts. And the Dead Sea Scrolls was certainly that. Then, most recently, about 4 or 5 years ago, they found the Tel Dan stele. The Tel Dan stele is nothing like the stele that was found in Nineveh, just a small piece of rock. But it has a lot of Aramaic information on there.
Tel Dan is amazing. I went to Tel Dan. I've gone to Israel 10 times. The first trip, we went to Tel Dan. And all the stuff that you hoped was at Bethel was at Tel Dan.
Tel Dan's amazing because, for whatever reason, it's a site that was not ransacked.
Right.
And
everything's there. The altars that they sacrifice the bulls on.
Yeah. Not sure why it wasn't ransacked like some of the other sites.
It's kind of in a reclusive area.
Could be. So Tel Dan, this stele that they found at Tel Dan tells the story. Just again, it's so amazing. In the last 10 years only, scholars, academia began to say that King David and King Solomon were not actual figures. They were invented to establish what we know as Judaism. They were not actually real, or certainly not the same individuals that's portrayed in the Bible. Again, they are just 15 years ago at most, they're challenging the validity of the stories of the Bible. That there's no King David. He was invented, and no Solomon. So suddenly they find this stele at Tel Dan that prominently mentions the house of David. Of course, referring to David as king and his house, the house of David. And not only did it mention King David and the house of David, it mentioned King Jehoram and King Ahaziah. The Bible tells the story of an unholy alliance between King Jehoram of the northern kingdom and King Ahaziah from the south. King Ahaziah from the south was an evil king. Right. He was not one of the good kings of the sons of David. He wanted to form an alliance with Jehoram in the north, and they went after Syria, right? Syria was being used by God to buffet the northern kingdom. Yeah, Syria was God's instrument for a short time to come against the northern kingdom, because the northern kingdom of Israel were apostate. They were worshiping the very Syrian gods that they should not have worshipped, and God said, okay, you want to worship the gods of these people, they will be your enemy. Mm-hmm. Right? Because the standard for Israel was much higher. So Jehoram and Azariah formed an alliance. They brought chariots, they brought men of war. And this tells us that over 10,000 of the Judahites and the Israelites of the northern kingdom died on the battlefield at the hands of this one great king. Doesn't name the king clearly, because the stele is broken up, it's not real clear. But it clearly denotes the battle that was fought with King Jehoram and Ahazariah. So there you have a stele that was found not more than 20 years ago that totally nullifies what the scholars and the academics have been trying to say about King David. Because if Ahaziah existed, then King David existed.
Right.
Because Ahaziah was one of the sons of David, a king in Jerusalem. Right. And so, but the fact that it told the same story of that unholy alliance, and they forming an alliance, and it says it on the stele. Judahites, men of Judah and Israelites joined together, and they would destroy 10,000 of them with chariots and men of war. Perfect alignment with the Bible. So it's as if every time academia, the agents of unbelief, the agents that are opposing any real faith based on what's being found, would make an attempt or thrust forward, like I said, to project an agenda that's anti-God, something comes up, an archaeological find comes up that totally nullifies them. And that's been consistent, right? UNESCO have been denying any possibility that Jerusalem has anything to do with the Jewish people, that the Jewish people, the people of Israel, wasn't even there. And what has been happening since they've been making these claims? Archaeological find after archaeological find has been presented by God to defy them, to deny them. You know, one thing you cannot do, you cannot pretend that an archaeological find is wrong.
Right.
Because archaeology is a sure science.
There it is.
It's a sure science. And when you have etymology, archaeology, and history in perfect alignment with the Bible, listen, how could you deny it?
Well,
how could you deny
all of the locations of all of the things that you read about in the scripture, when you go there, they're there.
Yep. Well, and
the well of Abraham we visited this past trip.
Yes.
It's there.
But the interesting thing, and I'm going to ask you about this, is this week they're reporting that in Turkey they found a mountain shaped like a boat. And the initial studies say it is at least 5,000 years old.
That's the same one that they've been looking at. That was discovered a couple, 3 decades ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is, what do you think is, with everything that's going on right now, what do you think it's indicating?
Ron Wyatt, back in the early 1980s, came across that site, and he, together with the Turks and so on at Mount Ararat, he declared that that's Noah's Ark because it was made of stone, but it was fossilized, fossilized wood. Right about the size of the Ark of the Noah's Ark, and everything fits the bill. It's just about where it should be according to the Bible. But academia didn't accept it because it was Ron Wyatt. Ron Wyatt was not a part of academia. He was a believer, spirit-filled believer, a spirit-filled Seventh-day Adventist who went around the ancient world discovering very important sites, but he was always rejected and debunked by academia because he wasn't a part of the establishment. Ron Wyatt wanted to prove the Bible. And he did that. He was the guy who discovered Mount Sinai, the true Mount Sinai. He was the guy that went to Sodom and Gomorrah and took out a penknife, it's on video, and pulled little sulfur balls out of the side of the rocks and put a big lighter to them, and they lit up, proving that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by hailstones. This is Ron Wyatt. So academia hated him. They literally despised him because who's this upstart? Who's this rogue who's coming along and disproving what we're doing?
Right.
And proving the Bible. So that's been discovered, and that's now being a thing.
Yeah, it's.
That's it.
Yep, this is the times of India.
Yeah.
So they just did carbon dating on it, and it came back, dating back 5,500 years.
Yeah.
Which aligns with the narrative in the Bible.
Yeah.
So guess what? Academia is going to totally debunk that. Why? Because academia, this is Christian academia. Christian academia has an agenda, which is to nullify faith. They've been consistently doing this. They took the story of the Exodus And they've massaged it and they've manipulated in 100 different ways to illustrate that there was a massive volcano in the Aegean Sea that caused the effects of the Exodus story. And they will...
The plagues
they will,
and the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is it's two archaeological teams now working together.
Uh-huh.
So before where it would have been just, Ron Wyatt's team, which I think they're the Noah's Ark Research. Is that what?
Yeah,
they are?
they don't associate with Ron Wyatt. Ron Wyatt discovered that back in well, to say he discovered it, that's not true, because he went exploring about at the foot of Mount Ararat, inquiring of the locals about, is there anything here like a boat? And they said, oh sure, let's go up there. And they took him up there and they showed him the site. He's the first Westerner who is an archaeologist, not accepted by academia, to say this is it.
Right.
But they've always known that the site was there. I mean, the locals.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to look at satellite imagery, it looks just like the boat.
Absolutely. So academia will not write papers on that. They would not publish anything on that because it's too faith stirring. Mm-hmm. So to get back to the question, how does Christian academia factor into the reality that archaeological finds concerning the Bible can support our faith? Yes, biblical archaeology can build your faith and bolster your faith. Absolutely. I became a believer when I saw living archaeology, in that I saw the people of Israel praying at the wall in Jerusalem, and I said, that's it, I believe. Because I had read the Torah, I had read Deuteronomy, I had read the blessings and the curses, all of the promises of restoration. And I saw that everything that's prophesied in the book of Deuteronomy and the Torah was fulfilled. And so the people of Israel praying at the wall, to me, was the evidence. That's an archaic people. Yeah. That's archaeology, living
archaeology.
And they're at the wall, and so I became a believer. The purpose of academia, and I'm convinced that academia is being influenced by the dark forces, is to nullify that faith and to challenge it. So people are beginning to see things. They come along and say, well, that's, they're like fake news. Basically, right. They function just like fake news, and that's their purpose. So yes, absolutely, academia has a purpose, and they don't factor into the reality of what biblical archaeology can represent. Biblical archaeology is profound, especially since God has been revealing all of the evidences. I mean, just 5 years ago, or 6 years ago, they found that signet by King Hezekiah.
Yes.
and I mean, that's pretty bold. Well, they found it right there where King David built his palace, which was the structure that the kings of Judah would live in.
Yeah. And Joshua's altar.
Joshua's altar, which, again...
Oh, that's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, academia is staying far away from it. And they're avoiding it with everything in them. And there's all sorts of sites in Israel that we've been to. Agaman.
Yeah, yeah.
Agaman, the footprint in the Jordan Valley, Gilgal. That to me is a rich archaeological site that should be featured, should be, excavated. Papers should be written on it. Articles, magazines should be published concerning. Do they do magazines anymore?
Yep.
Is there such a thing?
There's actually a magazine totally dedicated to archaeology.
Called Biblical Archaeology.
Yeah.
Still
there's
around?
one that's Biblical Archaeology, and then there's one that's just archaeology.
Okay, good.
Okay.
It's still around. So,
Archaeology Today. Yeah.
So Algaman, Joshua's Altar, all of these sites should be all over those magazines. But they will not touch them. But they will go to Machu Picchu.
Yes.
They will go to Ndebi Tepe, and they will go to all those places and marvel over these places and come up with all sorts of ridiculous conclusions about UFOs and so on, but they wouldn't touch the reality of what's happening in Israel.
Yeah, when we went up to the Temple Mount this last trip, and there were the pieces of the columns from the temple, and you could still see the gold.
Yeah.
When you looked underneath, you could still see the gold on them. It was like...
Yeah, it makes me marvel. All these Arabs didn't steal it.
I bet they tried.
I'm sure.
So there is archaeology that's pure, that's people like Ron Wyatt, they still exist, that's earnestly working to prove the narratives of the Bible and build the faith of people. But not far behind them is academia. I have no love for academia. I see academia in the same light that I see
modern
orthodoxy.
academia is
Christian
Religious
orthodoxy.
buffoonism.
yeah.
Christian orthodoxy, I put in the same box as Christian academia. Their purpose is to nullify faith and to quench the burning love and passion that people will have for God's word. And they succeed. I mean, they succeed.
Yeah, when I've encountered it, I've marveled that anyone would want to squelch the Word of God, really, in someone's life.
The way they turned themselves into pretzels, like, the story you just gave about the phantom Ethiopian. Okay, so you'll believe in this.
Which is the most bizarre story I've heard them come up with.
You won't accept that God did it, but this mysterious phantom army would come and do it. I mean, it just doesn't even make sense, right?
It's kind of racist. It's kind of like the dark people came up.
It is. A mysterious force from Ethiopia crept up from the Dead Sea. No one knew they were coming. And they said it was an army.
Because they were dark.
They said, they said it was an army of about 1 million Ethiopians. How can 1 million people cross over a landscape? It takes weeks.
You're right.
To create such a movement.
And where did they get food?
Food.
Yeah.
Think of the logistics of it. They're in the Dead Sea. Where's the water coming from? My goodness. And so these people, these scientists, these archaeological, academics, they believe that. They publish that stuff. They published. I laugh when I hear about that. But, it's buffoonery, like you said.
Yeah.
You have me all excited because what's going to pop up with all the craziness we have going on in the world?
What's coming?
And there's new finds in Israel every day.
Yeah.
So I want to say something. God's going to bring something forward, but it may not be archaeological. It might be in the spirit realm. I think there's going to be a move of the Holy Spirit, unlike anything we've ever seen before. It will surpass 1967, 1948. Yom Kippur. After the Yom Kippur War, there was a real move of the Holy Spirit among young Israelis, and many of them became filled with the Holy Spirit and believers, and that was powerful. But I think there's something coming now that will surpass by far what has ever happened in the past, and it's not going to be archaeological. It'll be something. It'll be something if suddenly the Ark of the Covenant would show up. Mm-hmm. What a thing that would be if all of a sudden in all of this, boom, here's the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, that's one artifact that, thanks to Hollywood, everybody knows about, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about the Gen Zers, but...
Somebody watched Indiana Jones.
Well, it would mean nothing to them, for sure.
Right.
But, a lot of people, everybody who watched Indiana Jones knows about
people have said... in discussion and conversation, people have said, why would God want to do such a thing? So look at the polarization that it would cause. Mm-hmm. All by itself. That would be a justifiable reason. Bringing forth the ark. Yeah.
You'd have no excuse, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well,
evidence that Moses lived.
The scholars will certainly find a way to come against it because it was initially discovered by Ron Wyatt. Ron Wyatt discovered where it is, and the Israelis know where it is. So if they were to break that out of that, it's under Golgotha. If they were to break that out of that rock now, it would create quite a stir. Mm-hmm. But academia will lose their minds.
Yep.
They would lose their minds because again, it was Ron Wyatt and his two sons that dug 40 feet into that rock and discovered that chamber underneath Golgotha, which is Jeremiah's grotto. And it's there, and that's one of the most reliable stories concerning the Ark of the Covenant. And what's most reliable about it is the hole that Ron Wyatt dug with his two sons. The Israeli government, and you can go there, but they even built a pavilion on top of it. The Israeli government put a steel plate, I'm not kidding you, about that thick, with huge hinges that's born right into the rock and heavy, heavy padlocks in the front of it. That hole has been covered up. Now, you tell me, if Ron Wyatt, and of course the story is very vivid, there's video of him in the garden tomb digging into that rock underneath Golgotha. So it happened. Now, if he found nothing, why would the Israeli government protect the area? And then I was going to Garden Tomb regularly, well, every year, and going to that spot, standing there looking at the metal plate and just, yep. So I'm not the only person that was aware of it. I'm sure they had people coming in all the time questioning about that. So what did they do? They built a pavilion right on top of it. Remember that pavilion?
Yeah.
They built a pavilion right on top of the entrance into that dig. I believe the ark is there. Remember that year we went there and we worshipped in that pavilion, and there was a real move of the Holy Spirit?
Yeah.
I mean, a real move of the Holy Spirit. Mickey Barney wept, and it was powerful.
Yeah.
Big metal plate underneath that pavilion. I believe the ark is there, and the Israelis know it. The Israeli government has been stating that, we know where the ark is. Not a mystery. We know where it is. So, would they break it out at this point? I think they will wait until the third temple is built, and they will break it out.
There's a Department of Antiquities in Israel, and they just sit on everything.
Yeah. No, I believe they're sitting on the Ark of the Covenant. They know where it is. It's right there under Golgotha and Jeremiah's grotto. And they're just waiting for the right opportunity to bring it out. And by the way, it was after that find by Ron Wyatt that they allowed the Garden Tomb to become a sealed-off project. Before that, it was open. Before he discovered that what he claimed is the Ark, it was open to anyone. You could have walked up from the Damascus Gate and come right into the park, sit around, and enjoy the atmosphere. But after that find, gates, walls, blocked it off.
Yeah.
You can't get in. So it becomes a Christian experience, right? So it's protected by the Israeli government, by the antiquities. It's protected. So I'm pretty convinced that it's there. And Israel is, like you said, sitting on it. Ron Wyatt was profound. Ron Wyatt, before he died, and he died of some sort of a lung infection. The guy, he lived in that hole that he dug with his sons for months, breathing all that contaminated dust. He died. He had a lung condition. He died. On his dying bed, they came to interview him because they wanted him to testify before he died that what he saw and what he said was true. And he wept as he was about to die, testifying that what he saw was true. How do you nullify someone's testimony like that? You can't.
Right.
So, but he's not academia. And why would he not be accepted by academia? Because he's trying to validate the story of the Bible. He's bringing glory to God, and he loved Israel. He was a lover of Israel, and he was there to be an encouragement and all the other factors. So no, he could not have been accepted by academia. Academia is a virus. It's a germ.
Yeah. Even when you look at like Einstein, for example, Einstein said a lot of things that lead me to believe that he's a believer. But if you read anything about him, you don't hear that. Right?
You couldn't.
Oh no, he professed he was a believer.
Yeah, but they cover it up.
Yeah, in
Most
academia,
physicists are.
Yes.
Yeah.
in academia, you cannot declare any faith at all
Right.
because you'll be shunned, you'll be blacklisted.
Yeah.
So we should read something from the Bible, and God's going to humble the nations, and He's going to nullify all of their efforts. In Psalm 83 and in Psalm 2, it's reflected what God is going to do in regards to the nations. And so I'm thinking we should read Psalm 2.
I got 83 up.
83. Well, let's read some of 83. You have 83 up?
Yeah.
How much of it should we read? The whole psalm should be, I believe, should be memorized by Christians and should be prayed every day by Christians.
O God, do not remain quiet. Do not be silent. And O God, do not be still. Behold, your enemies make an uproar, and those who hate you have exalted themselves. They make shrewd plans against your people and conspire together against the treasured ones. They have said, come, let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they have conspired together with one mind. Against you do they make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria also has joined with them. They have become a help to the children of Lot. Deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera at Jabin, and the torrent of Kishon, who were destroyed at Endor, who make as dung for the ground, make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, and all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us possess for ourselves the pastures of God.
Yep, and I think the psalm is pretty accurate in many ways. It's pointing to this great conflict where the nations will form a confederacy and will utilize the nations that you just read about. And when you look at where those nations are located, it's directly surrounding Israel.
Yep.
And there is this incredible alliance with all of these nations that's being formed right now. What's the basis of the alliance? Hatred for Israel.
Right.
Blood quest.
Yep.
Jewish blood quest. So this is happening right before us today. And many people, I spoke to someone today, and I've been calling this World War III, which is a dreadful thing to even consider. But many people are beginning to see this for what it is. It's a conflict that has the potential for global reach. Mm-hmm. And it's happening. It seems as if there's nothing you can do to stop it. The hand of God is involved. And God's ultimately going to bring the nations into the valley of Jehoshaphat, where he will judge them. And that's where this is going. Multitudes in the valley of decision.
Right.
So, not a good note to end the program on. But for those that are listening, and we don't have many listeners, but we have some. And by the way, if this program ministers to you and it reflects your faith to a certain extent, I want to encourage you to share this, to like and share it. How do they say it? Smash it or whatever? I'm not sure. But share it, because more people need to know the reality of what God is doing. And we're not doing something that no one else is doing. There are other people that are doing what we're doing. But this needs to go out. This needs to be heard by every Christian, because this is a very critical time for us as Christians. This is when our faith, our conviction is most needed. This is really about the story of Esther. We're called for this time. We exist for such a time as this. So I want to encourage our listeners to share this, to like it and share it, and let's propagate the message of the kingdom of God.
Well, that's our program. If the questions that we've dealt with here today raise other questions in your thinking, you are at liberty to share them with us. The easiest way to do that is to email us at voice@buildupzion.org. Again, that's voice@buildupzion.org. Until next week, shalom.